Hi, this is John Dennis of Momentum. What I want to chat a little about is the importance of size and fit when it comes to your cycling shoes and how it affects the biomechanics and the comfort and your prospective position on the bike. So obviously there's a difference between a running shoe and a cycling shoe and what its function needs to be. A cycling shoe is essentially more akin to how your foot might function inside a ski boot for those that go skiing regularly. Your foot is essentially fixed against something that's rigid, that you want to sort of try and get control off of. Obviously in cycling what we want to try and do is apply as much force as we can through the pedal stroke in a most efficient and comfortable and stable way. So having started to work a little bit more recently with leg shoes, it's become more apparent as we've sort of actually looked in more detail at people's feet that there are a fair number of people that are prospectively in the wrong size shoe. So obviously there's individuality in terms of the size, the shape and the actual biomechanical stability of a foot, and how that goes into a cycling shoe needs to be pretty individualized. So obviously when you were kids and you had school shoes measured, you probably went to a shop, and normally you'd go to Clark's or somewhere, and you would get your foot measured, probably in a device like this. So we use this, it's a Biomechanical device. So essentially when we use this, we want to accurately know the length of your foot and basic shoe sizing, which sounds simple enough. Obviously there's individuality in terms of different manufacturers that will size differently. So getting your foot inside the right shoe is difficult to do in the right shoe. As well as looking at length, we then need to sort of consider what the relative width of your foot is relative to the length. And that's where there can be issues, because obviously people can have a narrow foot, a wide forefoot. So we need to accurately know what the width of your foot is. So we have a grading scale. You probably heard vaguely when widths are generally considered sort of A, B, C, D and E. Usually once you're getting out beyond D, then we're sort of considering a wider fitting shoe is going to be necessary. So that's just the basic shape of your foot, and how that translates into a shoe needs to be taken into consideration. Often we'll find that people with a relatively wide foot end up going into too long a shoe, basically to try to accommodate the width of their foot. So recently I had a client in who was, when we measured them in the Biomechanical device, their foot measured 43 in Euro sizing, but they were wearing a 46 size cycling shoe. So the alarm bells are starting to go off in terms of how that is going to affect their position when we look at that in more detail when we get them up onto the bike. Obviously, in terms of where the foot is on the pedal when they're fixed into the cleat, is going to be difficult to sort of have a fairly comfortable position which distributes pressure evenly when the cleat is effectively going to be quite a long way relatively forwards on the foot. Generally, we like the cleat to be more rearward on the shoe. It's usually more comfortable as a starting point for people to feel like they've got a more even distribution of pressure when they're applying force on the pedal. So if you imagine when someone's in a shoe that's maybe 2 or 3 sizes too long, the cleat, even if it's set rearward on that shoe, is still going to be more towards their toes than anything else. So you're going to struggle to get that cleat further back. Fortunately, with a leg shoe, it's probably one of the only shoes out there in cycling terms where you have got the ability to prescribe different shaped shoes to accommodate the individual's foot. So leg will also provide us with a measuring device, which again will look at the length of the foot by having the heel fixed in this device, and we'll measure the length. And then also we can sort of have a starting point at least with the width of the foot here by turning the device sideways, having the forefoot in the device here. And when we look at the relative width to the length, we can then sort of at least have a starting point in terms of what shoe might be appropriate to go into. So the when we look at the shoe itself, the Lake then designed their shoes so that they actually change the width of the last of the shoe. So in other words, what your foot is actually sort of applying force against will be different in a wider shoe to a narrow fitting shoe. A lot of manufacturers will tend to produce a wider fitting shoe, but all they do tend to change the size of the upper to accommodate a bit more volume in here, rather than actually sort of changing sort of where you're applying force, in other words the last of the shoe, in terms of the shape here. So it can certainly affect comfort, and at least just getting that as a starting point is an important part of just that contact point, the foot pedal interface, at least getting the right size shoe. Obviously within the studio here, and having background in physiotherapy between the team, we can then go into a little bit more detail. So your foot, as well as just its overall length and width, can also be variable in terms of the arch height and just the functional stability within the shoe. Because prescribing prospectively an orthotic device or an insole to stabilize the foot in that nice neutral comfortable position may be necessary. So when we go through our physical assessment before we put someone on the bike, looking at how the foot is stable or not, how it functions under a little bit of load, does the arch collapse, where is the pressure, we've got the ability as well to even go over the foot scan, where we can just see where the distribution of force is by having someone go into a squat or a single leg squat and just seeing where the behavior or where the pressure goes in the foot. So we can either prescribe just something off the shelf, which will sometimes be sufficient just to stabilize the arch